Moment. All right, we're live and we're recording.
Thank you. Good morning. This is President Dolan. Gavel, gavel. Thank you. I don't have one, so that's what I'm going to do from now on. Welcome to the Flood Board Workshop. So let me call to order the Central Valley Flood Protection Board Workshop of June 9th, 2023. So welcome to those of you who are in the room. Welcome to those of you who have logged on. I see people in the room have also logged on, so you're pretty smart. We have any announcements that need to be made before we proceed with the informal workshop? Okay, nothing. So welcome. Will be introductions in a moment. So if you would call the roll, Mr. DeAugustine, my helper today, Chavez DeAugustine. So please call the roll.
Board Member Ramirez.
Do we expect him?
No.
No. Not attending.
Board Member Griego.
Here.
Board Member Countryman.
Present.
Board Member Bosler. Secretary Johnson.
I'm here. Good morning.
Vice President Valines.
Here.
And President Dolan.
Welcome, Vice President. I didn't see you come in. All right. Member Ramirez is not able to attend today, but we have 6 board members present. And I also want to somewhat introduce this format that we have here this morning. You see a bit different array of people because it is a workshop, and I will be primarily leaning on our Chief Engineer, Michael Wright, who will be presenting a PowerPoint and segments for discussion. So we have our Chief Engineer, Michael Wright, at the table. We have our Environmental Program Manager, Andrea Buckley, the manager of the Environmental Services and Land Management Division. And we have our Program Manager, Ruth Darling, who is the manager of flood planning and programs. So you probably will understand why I've asked them to be at the table for interchange. And I've said when they want to speak, and I see some staff there, please do. Don't feel that you need to wait for me to ask you to speak, because it will be generally you helping us to discuss how to implement with energy and forward thinking the resolution that we adopted in adopting the update of the plan. Is Mr. Dua online? Is our board council logged in? Okay, when we expect board council Dua either online or present. So that's the staff here. So if there aren't any more questions or input, questions. I'm looking at my board. I'm looking at the audience. I don't see any hands raised. So we will proceed. We have a singular item, but it has multiple parts to it. The 2022 Central Valley Flood Protection Plan, as we know, because we spend a lot of time in cooperation with DWR, who prepares it, to present to us, to hold the hearings, to adopt, which we did in December 2022. And we were hoping to have this workshop a lot earlier, but we all know what started to occur in our great state on New Year's Eve through, we're still experiencing the impact of the atmospheric rivers. But the board has always wanted to have this workshop so that we could go through the resolution that we did adopt and figure out how we can accomplish what it is, our goals are, and what the plan hopes to do and defines. So the purpose of the workshop is for the board to have a discussion with our staff and with other participants and with each other to come to some consensus on an implementation process of the goals. So at this point, I will turn to you, Mr. Wright, so you can introduce how this workshop discussion, presentation discussion will occur. Thank you for your effort to organize this.
You're welcome. Yeah, thank you, President Dolan. Good morning. Michael Wright, Chief Engineer for the board. I think that you basically covered the intentions of the meeting today. It's really to look at the 2022 resolution of adoption for the 2022 Central Valley Flood Protection Plan update and put all of the implementation goals that the board added to the resolution into themes so that we can prepare and have future workshops to go over those individual themes and individual goals. So today, I don't expect to have a real technical discussion of the resolution, but to try to reach consensus on where staff has placed the goals of the resolution into themes. I'm introing, Ruth and I will go back and forth on the presentation. And I think we can get into it. If we could get the presentation pulled up, please.
We do have a PowerPoint, and I would just add, from my perspective, and the board can say different, of course, they don't agree. It's not just that we will organize board workshops on implementation. We might very well determine one of our committees that exists would be given direction, or there might be very specific, smaller, identified work groups. It will depend on resources and ideas. All right, there's your PowerPoint. I'll turn mine on mute.
Okay, thank you. So it's already been intro. Okay, background, just a little bit of background for everybody. The 2022 Central Valley Flood Protection Plan update was adopted by the board through resolution of adoption 2022-29, December 16th of 22. There are 3 themes of the 2022 plan update, including climate resilience, performance tracking, and alignment with other state efforts. And the plan did include 4 chapters. Chapter 1, updating the plan. Chapter 2, plan implementation progress. Chapter 3, risk priority actions and intended outcomes. And Chapter 4, investment strategy and imperative to act. Next slide, please. A little bit more background. Through the resolution of adoption 2022-29, the board identified known and achievable goals that, if completed, will contribute to the goals of the plan. That includes advancing actions to address climate change effects while improving flood risk management all in the Central Valley. There are around 50 goals that are included in the 2022 resolution of adoption. Looking at those goals and trying to pair them into various themes, we've come up with 5 themes. Those include implementation, climate resilience, funding, operations, and strategic planning. Next slide, please. We've somewhat already covered the goals of the workshop, provide clear grouping of the resolution goals, which we've done for board consideration to achieve agreement on the grouping of the resolution goals among the board and interested parties, provide a recommended schedule for future workshops and discussions on the 5 topics. And these may not all fall into workshops. They may go to other venues such as coordinating committee or advisory committee. There may be goals from the workshop that are better to work out in smaller groups or working with the Flood Control Association to achieve those goals. And then provide recommended forums, just went over that, receive additional direction from the board on our recommendation. So hopefully a good discussion. Staff has made the recommendation on where the goals should be in the 5 topics. Some of those overlap, some of them could exist in 2 different places. So hopefully we can work through those and all reach consensus. Next slide, please.
Go back to that one, please, that you just did. But at each slide, I just want to ask if the board has questions and if it's clear what the scope and progress of this meeting is. So I'll say yes. Okay. The rest of you just have to agree. I want the board to understand what he's doing. And I forgot to say that what I do is I sort of pay attention to timing, and I do take a break at some point for about 10 or so minutes. It's the Dolan 10 minutes, not too long, because we need that. And then at some point at about 11:30 or 12, we are going to have some sandwiches brought in. And we have enough for the board and maybe some extras. So just want you to know, we just don't go continuously. We have a break there. All right, Mr. Rice.
Thank you. Sorry. So the plan is to go through each of the themes with all of the goals and have a discussion on all the goals within each theme one by one. Ruth is going to go over the first few. I'll take one, and then I think the planning goes back to Ruth. But before we get there, is there anything I missed or anything you want to add, Ruth?
I don't think so. I think that President Dolan went over this. Can you hear me okay? Oh, that's right. Ruth Darling with the Flood Board. I think we have about 30 folks on the line and several in the room. And we do have our colleagues from DWR that will be working with on scoping the 2027 update online and in the room. So I think that if we could really encourage an interactive conversation with our colleagues at DWR and interested parties. We have members from the Flood Control Association here. So that's really all, just a true workshop, right? Workshopping the resolution.
Thank you for adding that, Ruth. This is President Dolan again. I'm going to ask you to look at those who have participated online to see if they raise their hand at any given point. So I'm sure that we can call on them, or you can. Just put your finger up and say, I got somebody.
Okay, I can help do that. I am logged in, so.
Thank you.
Just wanted to add one thing. There are copies of the staff report on the back table if anybody would like to have those. And the attachment 2 in the back is the grouping of the goals into the theme. So we've taken all of the goals from the resolution and put those as into groups as attachment B. The numbers, they're not specifically sequenced because they jump around between themes, if that makes sense. But each goal in attachment B has a number associated with it, and that number relates to the resolution of adoption. So you can kind of go back and forth and cross-check if necessary. That's all I have.
Thank you for that. And that's attachment B as in boy. And attachment A is the 19-page resolution. So if you want to read that, read the back of your plan. But thank you for organizing it this way.
I'm going to hand it over to Ruth now. Thank you.
Thank you. Again, Ruth Darling with the Flood Board. So the first theme we're going to cover is implementation of the resolution. And so just starting with resolution item 13, so statement on increasing the pace and scale of implementation of the flood plan. We also move on to tracking implementation of the flood plan. So item 24 discusses that the board, through the coordinating committee, will work with DWR and local agencies to track implementation of the flood plan, identify implementation champions, and remove obstacles that have prevented implementation challenges in the past. So I think too, with our colleagues at DWR that present monthly at board meetings, I think we would like to see maybe a theme in that written report on implementation or tracking implementation of the flood plan. And so granted, this is a collective effort, but I think that's one venue where we can report out potentially monthly on DWR activities that are in line with implementation of the flood plan. So that's one area where we can report out, also within the coordinating committee. And then moving on to collaboration. So those are items 21, 34, 50, and 54. I'm just agreeing that the board is the public venue for flood planning, and those get done monthly as well as through our coordinating committee and advisory committee and board workshops. So if we can discuss, where those items would go, either through the coordinating committee, advisory committee, or workshops, that would increase our collaboration. We did hear when we were drafting the resolution that some of these items could be done in the coordinating committee, and we'll get to those a little bit later. So I work with Kim Floyd to lead the agenda for the coordinating committee. So anything that we come up with here, I'll take notes, and I can circle back with Kim Floyd on those items. And then, of course, necessary funding. This comes up several times. This is our statement that we will work with DWR, other state and federal agencies to identify and obtain necessary resources for funding and implementing the flood plan. And then, of course, we have equity. So equity was a new theme in the flood plan, and that's item 20. I do want to acknowledge that the board is working on implementing a flood plan equity work group. So you did hear in January about the board's DEI task force. That's bifurcated into an internal flood board culture surrounding DEI, and then equity in flood risk reduction. So for that, Wendy Wang of my staff will be leading that flood plan equity work group, and then coordinating with our colleagues at DWR, as well as any other interested parties on just diving deeper into equity within the floodplain, and so that implementation goal of the 2022 update. So I'll stop there and open it up for discussion. We do have one more slide on implementation, but taken in chunks.
Sounds good. Thanks for that overview. I see that Member Johnson is sitting right next to you, and he was one of the two members of the board that helped to draft the resolution that we adopted. So you want to say something? Please.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Brian Johnson here. Say first of all, just thanks for all of the work that y'all did putting this together and giving us a shot at a framework to keep tracking things. I might have a couple of questions as we go through about what you intend with a sub-bullet, and they might sound like a question of why something is in one place and not another. And I just want you to know before I do any of that, I generally am not sure that I care that much where something is and not. It's good to group things and have themes. That's necessary, and some of us will lump and split differently. There are probably multiple right ways, but there might be a couple of places where having it in one place or another is probably revealing something about how you're thinking of it. And so that if I'm asking a question about it, that would be why. And I have one of those here, which is we've got a necessary funding 53 in this section, and we also have a separate funding theme, later. And so I'm curious. Something different about 53 that makes it be here or not.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
We have the mic. So in my mind, that was, necessary funding to implement the flood plan. So that's, the last bullet of the resolution that sort of captures each, major thought that we had when we drafted the resolution, right? So the hydrology scenarios in response to climate change, performance standards, flood system improvement. So in my mind, A through G were about implementing the resolution, but we need funding to do that.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, and so if something shows up in a couple of different ways, it's because we might be thinking about the need for it in a couple of different directions or different types of funding, and that's why they're grouped the way they are.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so in the funding category, you'll see later, we pull out like 53.
Yeah, 53 is mentioned in a couple of different places because
Yeah,
it has
overlap.
the bullets. Okay, so I'll turn it over to others before I ask more questions, except for one thing that I will say, just as framing, is that I really like the idea of coming back to, for us in workshops and also coordinating with DWR and the advisory and the coordinating committee, because so many of these are shared responsibilities and will require different types of work group teams to carry out. And, there was a lot of discussion as we were finalizing the the plan and the resolution about how different organizations would support each other and work together and hold each other accountable. And DWR was also, Mary amended the plan, or some of the last revisions addressed how they were, intended to think about tracking. And so I think one of the things that I'll be looking to hear more about as we go through here is how, what we know about how they're planning to, DWR is planning to track the things that are more solely within their purview, and we are, and how those will relate, and when we can be bringing things back to coordinating committee or our workshops or the advisory committee. Advisory committee has a whole set of, metrics tracking type work for the conservation strategy that we don't want to have become disconnected from, other types of tracking, for example.
I like that.
I'll yield the floor for other questions, and I'll probably have more as we go, but
Okay, that's a 10-4.
yeah.
Is that right, Member Johnson? It is clear in reading through the resolution and the staff report today that funding is a concern no matter what can occur. It's one thing to have goals, it's one thing to have hopes, it's one thing to have effort, but without the resources to implement, it's not going to happen. So we'll move with what we have. Let me just sort of nod here with each board member, see if anyone wants to have input at this point or proceed. Member Bosler?
Yeah, I think obviously this plan is really unique in that it does have this longer horizon look, and it does a lot to quantify what's needed. And so then as we go to look at how to finance it, we have to look at all the different places where funding can come from. And I think the real exciting way to think about, especially these larger landscape multi-benefit projects, is looking other places, not just in buckets that say flood control on them. Because, I had a chance just this week with Chris and Andrea and other staff to go, and Mary Jane, to go up and look at a project that's happening in the Yuba Water Agency. And, there's many, many different programs that are funding that project that's going to have major benefits for flood control, but also major ecosystem restoration. And so, I really think that we can do more in a leadership role here at the board, and really talking to some of the other departments outside of DWR even about how we can align strategies to have their investments also provide flood benefit, because the gap is large. And even with the GO bond on the table, which is really, I think, necessary to keep some of the important work going and to also have matches for the important U.S. Army Corps money that's going to come into the state, we have a long ways to go to be able to implement what we need. And it's all about pace. We've got to keep moving more rapidly, which is well laid out in the resolution. About increasing our pace, there are well-documented, as Chris knows, well-documented deferred maintenance numbers across state government. Flood's not the only thing, but flood is an issue that has real consequences, as we have seen historically, for life and property, and real expensive costs as well. And so I think there's just a really big imperative for us to figure out how to do better than we have historically about aligning funding to really provide more flood benefit.
Thank you. Member Grego?
Just want to say I agree 100% with what Keely had just said. And, Yuba County has kind of taken a different approach about how we address flood control. And we got to see that this week in regards to building capacity into the river channels. That's not building levees, that's building capacity, for more flood and lowering the flood elevation on both sides of those rivers, whether it be Yuba County and Sutter County. Those were great projects because they were regional projects, even though it was Yuba County doing all the work and paying for all that work that to be done. It actually had a benefit to Sutter County. So I'm going to say that, in order to, I look at this flood management funding essentials, and, it says that we need $30 billion in order to do what we plan to do. And I would suggest that we put on our website a little ticker that shows how that cost goes up every single month, if not every single year. These projects don't get cheaper, they get more expensive. And so the urgency behind what we're doing today is really huge. It's, we've got to look at creative ways and partnerships, as, Keely stated, in order to address these issues. So I'm all in. I know everybody else is, and just wanted to impress upon how important what we do here in these meetings. Thank you.
Can I talk one more time?
Of course you
Okay.
can.
So, I mean, something that's very temporal that's happening right
Member
now
Bosler.
in the conversation is about the suite of infrastructure streamlining bills that the governor has put forward. And I will just say that CEQA and other permitting delays also slows down good environmental projects. And that was something that we also heard loud and clear this week when we were touring. And even our own processes, which, I really am excited to want to do more work on, when they know how to do, the regulations speak more clearly to reinforcing a levee, more clearly to that project than they do to a project like what Mary Jane was talking about. And so I really think we need to have a more nuanced view of those efforts that the governor is making to reduce the time and costs to get a project to implementation than the traditional binary that people have had around those kinds of efforts. I think there's still a lot of safeguards in place, and we have to address this issue of time because time is money. And the longer these projects wait to be implemented, 15 years sometimes, longer even for some projects, the more expensive they get and the opportunities in some cases slip by. And so that's, I think, a really important thing. Another thing I saw that I'm excited about pursuing is partnerships, strategic partnerships with industry. They've got Tykert up there taking millions and millions of cubic yards of old mining tailings out of the river channel, and they're providing an economic benefit that is not having to come from government and from taxpayers. And they are obviously getting a benefit from it, but so is the environment and so are the taxpayers. And we need to look at more opportunities to not be afraid of those partnerships, but to lean in and look for them.
I think we need a whole workshop on your site view there, photos and talk. Whatever. So, okay, we've already talked on future issues here of funding and permitting and all that. So maybe we should, Member Countryman.
I wasn't going to make a comment, but hearing what I've heard, I feel I need to. I think our challenge is not projects. We're going to have help getting projects done. Our challenge is this deferred maintenance issue that we have. And something's got to change because the funding source right now is basically on the local reclamation districts. And we know that many of the ag areas, not so much the urban areas, but in the ag areas, it's just not there. The money's just not there. Now, we had a extremely successful ongoing program in the Delta, Delta Subventions program, that because the state offered a certain amount of money, it brought a lot of local money in to improves the state of the levees. And, you know, the levees have improved unbelievably in the last 20 years in the Delta from what they were before the subventions program. So I don't know exactly how we institute something, but if we're really serious about the deferred maintenance and making progress there, I think we're going to have to look at something like that.
Good thing this is being recorded. Probably in a week, I won't be able to read my writing here. Mr. Wright, back to you.
Thank you, President Dolan. Just wanted to add, it would be really great if, as we work through these, the board members could consider being part of like a smaller committee, 1 or 2 board members that would be interested in, working with staff on each of these various topics as we go through those. So not asking for volunteers right now, but please keep it in mind. If you're interested in one of those specific topics, we'd love to have that assistance from and involvement from the board members.
I think that's on everybody's list and mine. So as we go through this day, I would ask that board members, including me, to think about which we would like to do and communicate that with our executive officer. And there'll be a discussion about how to do it. We all may want to do it all, so we would sort of figure out how to do that array. Member Johnson? And then I see that Mitra Amani wants to have a comment.
Yeah, thank you, President Dolan. I like the suggestion. I have a couple of big picture questions that maybe about the structure of the briefing and the discussion today.
Okay.
But I'll ask him before we get too much farther in it, if that's okay with everybody. So just first off, like, you located all of the resolution action items in here somewhere. We've got everything. Yeah.
They're all there.
And are we going to, is the flow of this meeting that we're going to go through the themes and how we're sort of grouping things together, and then we're going to come back to a discussion of how we're going to track things and work on implementing those? Or are we supposed to be doing that as we're going through, like, these questions about assigning people to different subgroups for working on it? Like, does that come after we go through the themes and then we talk about what it is that we're doing to actually like track and monitor things?
So we do have a couple schedule slides, but as we're talking, I think it makes sense if there's specific items that we think should be dealt with in advisory committee or a workshop or coordinating committee, I would note those now so we can add them to the schedule at the end that we go over, right? So I think it should be done now. Like, because a lot of these statements that you see just on our first slide are really just statements, like, we need to increase the pace and scale of implementation. But then we actually talk about, like, design standards. While we're having that conversation, I think it's helpful to say, we heard that we should convene this in coordinating committee. So we're going to check that coordinating committee box. We want to deal with it there, right?
Yeah,
I think that makes
I think
sense.
that's right. I mean, I think we want to be grouping things to track, but also
Yeah.
setting up processes to do the tracking and making sure that things are carried. I mean, in my own visual, kind of brain, how I think about things, like, I can imagine something that sort of has the shape almost of a master kind of spreadsheet of things that we said we were going to do, things that we committed to in the plan somebody else has, all the things in our resolution. There are other things that are in the plan that we didn't restate in the resolution, but somebody is intent on working on those. And the plan said that we're going to do those things, collective, we, the community, maybe there were sub-bullets of things that we grouped. And then laying out who's working on those, and are there people at our agency or DWR, for the state, who are sort of points of accountability for reporting back and knowing where we stand on those. Is it somebody else, and having a system where we know who we're looking to be delivering some, one of the outcomes that we talked about, and asking progress. And if somebody else comes in and say, I want to work on that, we know what the team is that's working on those, and we can sort of structure feedback to help, do things along the way.
Yeah, that makes sense.
This is President Dolan. I just feel need to say something here. First of all, Board Counsel Dua has joined us, so welcome. Second, I think you're exactly right. I don't think today is when we assign board members to specific tasks, but the main reason I put staff at the table with us is they're going to pay attention to the things that we say are important, need to be done. This is where I think it can go. And then your idea of a spreadsheet, maybe they want to do it in a chart, something like that, about here's what the resolution says. Here are some actions that need to be done. Here's how, who, when, where, partners, things like that. So we'll, as we discuss, we'll identify those. And I do know that Ms. Darling, Mr. Wright, Ms. Buckley, and others are going to keep track of that. And then our next workshop, we're going to know a little bit more. We have 10 slides, we're on 5. So we'll be reaching each one of those as we go through. Does that make sense? Yeah, this is like first effort. We're not going away. This is going to be all the time. To increase the pace and scale, it means we need to work on it and talk about it and not just say it needs to be done, but get it going all the time. Any other board members? Mitra Imani put her hand up, so Mitra. Morning.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Good morning, President Dolan, members of the board. My name is Mitra Imani. I am the Flood Maintenance and Operations Branch Manager with DWR. I just wanted to, I heard the President, Board Member Countryman's comment about deferred maintenance. There is a program within DWR that FMO manages. It's the FMAP program, Flood Maintenance Assistant Program, that helps the LMAs that are willing to participate and sign the ONMR assurance agreement to help with their deferred maintenance. And we've implemented that program. It's been successful for the past 4 years. We did do a briefing at the coordinating committee last month. So we do have a program in place. I just wanted to state that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I see no other hands. I do. I see Member Bosler.
Yeah, and I think that's great. I think that the point that Mr. Countryman made, and I don't mean to make your point for you, is it's woefully inadequate. It's way less than what's needed. And that is something that we both need projects, but then we also need to make sure that we're taking care of the stuff we have because it's protecting a lot of people.
Mr. Wright, ready to move to the next slide?
I think we are. I received a email from Michael Sabagi, and he would like to provide input, but he's not sure if he can unmute on his end. He could just raise his hand, and they'll unmute him. So if you're listening, Michael, if you just raise your hand, I think we unmute you on this side.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes. Mr. Sabagian.
Yes, well, thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Michael, for getting me in because I couldn't figure it out. I'm sorry. One of the things I wanted to say is this, the implementation of the plan is not something that moves that quickly. Unfortunately, a lot of the items in there, it takes years for it to implement. So I'm not sure what was suggested of having a monthly reporting by anybody, including DWR, would really provide any benefit because the needle doesn't move that fast. It just moves very slow. So it would be very repetitive. Secondly is DWR is not the only agency that has a role on implementation. There are many, many different elements in there, including the encroachments the board handles, permitting issues with CVFPB and other resource agencies. I think if there is any briefing or presentation that needs to be made about implementation, it should be something that be coordinated, that all organizations come in and provide their update as far as what they're doing in order to move the plan forward. I suggest maybe annually, but I definitely wouldn't do it more than quarterly as far as any updates. That's just my suggestions to you guys. I think coordinating committees, is a great forum um, for implementing agencies to come in and discuss, identify potential solutions, and even get input from others. So I think that's definitely a great forum for any organization, including DWR or CDFW or anybody that if they want, or advisory committee is the other one for CDFW, for resource agencies, to get input as far as where they're going with their implementation, how they're basically moving the needle so we can have better progress on getting the plan implemented. I'll stop at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sabagian. If you heard us say that every single month DWR is showing up to say what they're doing, that wasn't what I heard. But to have an annual report on implementation, I just have my board members were all jumping out of their seats. So I'm going to say, well, we will have something each month because the theme of this is implementation. And yes, we all are, I'm looking at everyone here who's been involved with some kind of project, and I'm an alumni of the Hamilton City 29-year project to set back to protect the vulnerable community. So we know how things can take time, but we want to improve that. So it's not years and years, and we are completely aware of our responsibility in improving our processes as well, and the multiple partnerships that need to occur. Member Grego.
Thank you, President Dolan. You know, one thing I've learned about government is that you have to be patient. And I'm not a patient person. I'm a private business owner, and when we get things done, we get them done quickly. That's how the world works in the private business. And so Keely talked about a little bit about private-public partnerships. You know, that's one of the things that we depended on Three Rivers. We couldn't have done it in the 12 years that we did it and under budget. If it would have been a regular project that would have gone through the course, it would be a 40-year project. Us in Yuba County could not wait that long. And so we took that public-private partnership and we made that work more effectively and efficiently. And I'll tell you, from working with the private side doesn't want to wait 40 years. Their investments are today, and their investments mean something to them so that they see the end accomplishments there. And so if we want to encourage that kind of thing, that public-private partnership, then we need to make sure that we're ready for it. And that's dealing with the process. The process is what slows us down, the regulations, all the things that involve the process. And so I just want to state that because I think it needs to be said. Three Rivers is a great example to look at in a lot of different ways. So that concludes my comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Don't see any other nods here or there. Mr. Wright, you ready to move on to the next slide? Then you may. Mr. Wright.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on. Implementation of the 2022 conservation strategy. So that's
not Mr. Wright. It is Ms. Darling.
Yes, thank you. Ruth Darling with the Flood Board.
If I need to look that way, I will. Ms. Darling, please go.
So this states that the board will continue to facilitate collaboration and resolution of the interrelated competing state requirements to assist with the implementation of the 2022 conservation strategy update. So I think that some of that is inherent in, implementation of projects, and I'm looking at our council and Ms. Buckley in terms of flood easements versus conservation easements. So that's really what that item 32 is getting at. We do discuss some of that in the advisory committee. However, it's often done offline with our sister state agencies and legal, but it's a priority to continue to have that topic on the table and in the forefront of our minds. In addition, we have tribal relations, so that's item 40 and 41. So we did make some assurances with the 2017 flood plan update with our tribal partners. So the board commits to developing its relationships and partnerships with tribes in the Sacramento and San Joaquin River basins, and will strive to continue to participate in opportunities to educate and inform staff and board members on collaboration with tribes. And the board hereby commits to annual updates to tribal partners about ongoing projects, and an invitation is extended to tribal partners to address the board through future government-to-government meetings. We are consistently doing that. For example, just one project with the Yolo Bypass Cash Slough Partnership. And then we're moving on to item of modernization of board standards. So that's 35 and 36. Prioritize system-wide improvements, multi-benefit projects, and projects that consider multi-benefit features. Update to Title 23 to modernize the board's encroachment permit regulations. So that's the board acknowledging that encroachment permits are not all one size fits all, and they're appropriate approval methods for all projects, including restoration and multi-benefit projects, climate resilient projects that are consistent with state goals for a more resilient future. So we will seek funding to update the California Code of Regulations, Title 23, to advance implementation of the flood plan and the conservation strategy through modernization of our encroachment permit regulations. So we've heard from our partners consistently since the 2017 update that projects that are consistent with the flood plan and advancing the state's goals are not the same projects as a boat dock on the river. And we should have a more streamlined path through our encroachment permit process for permitting projects like that. And so that's really getting at that goal. That's item 36. And then revise regulations to streamline process for OMRR&R and ecosystem restoration projects. That's 46. So the board will seek revisions to its regulations to streamline the authorization process for OMRR&R activities and ecosystem restoration projects to enable a more effective implementation of programs focused on OMRR&R and ecosystem improvements. So I just want to stop there and bring it back a little bit, because we do talk about multi-benefit projects here, and hitting on what Board Member Bossler said earlier. And for the 2017 flood plan update and a lot of the work that we did in the advisory committee, which consists of non-governmental organizations, CVFPB, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, NIMS, really surrounding the conservation strategy, we came up with the definition of multi-benefit projects for the 2017 update. And so I'm just going to take a moment and read that to you. So multi-benefit projects are designed to reduce flood risk and enhance fish and wildlife habitat, as well as create additional public benefits such as sustaining agriculture production, improving water quality and water supply reliability, increasing groundwater recharge, supporting commercial fisheries, and providing public recreation and educational opportunities, or any combination thereof. So with that definition, it doesn't mention tribal, nor does it mention any sort of private benefits that Board Member Bossler mentioned earlier, which I would agree that really gets at the heart of the pace and scale of projects like the Hallwood project. So I just want to note that in our 5 years of scoping for the 2017 update, if there's a strong desire to coordinate, right, heavy coordination with our resource agency partners, as well as our NGO partners, maybe revisiting that definition. Just a thought. And so I'm going to stop there and open it up for more conversation. This is our last implementation slide.
I'll go first, and I'll let board members, sorry about that. I think that definition talks about outcomes and not process. So it's good for you to bring that up. And clearly in the next update, we'll be looking at all of these things to see if it needs to be revised. But one of our initial themes and first part of our resolution is to increase the pace and scale. And it really takes all partners all ideas and all efforts to do that. So thank you. So board members. I see the furrowed brow, Member Johnson, so you're up.
Sure. Well, I'll second that on the definition, and also just note that that was heavily discussed and negotiated, and it served us really well. And my personal priority would be on implementation and carrying things out, and not continually going back and, revisiting things that are part of the process. I mean, like the hallway project, it's true that definition didn't get at Teichert's motivation for being part of it, but everybody, I think, would look at that and say that was a good example of a multi-benefit project. So I'm not sure, things, if there are places where it is important to get at process or equity concerns or tribal involvement, I would certainly support that. But I think for my margin, the bang for the buck would be on moving forward and doing the things that we've said we would. Happy to discuss whenever. Two comments though. One is, as part of the discussion of the advisory committee and also implementation of the conservation strategy, I would encourage folks who are part of the plan implementation but haven't spent much time with that advisory committee product or the conservation strategy, or haven't for a few months because it's been, done for a while, to go back and look at the advisory committee recommendations that are, incorporated as part of the conservation strategy in our plan, because there's a lot of thought that went into work by different combinations of people who are part of the conservation NGO and ag economy part of our sector, plus locals, that got to how we would actually structure ourselves and make progress on some of the component parts of the broader work. And that's one of the things that I want to do with President Dolan as one of the advisory committee people, is go back to them and say, okay, you gave us these suggestions about how to improve this part of our process. Let's convene ourselves again and go to the next level and make that, more actionable. Is it, I think that some of them took the form of, you need a work group to figure out this issue. And we'll go back and find that and say, okay, let's convene that work group and go figure out that issue now. So I think that could really help. And those of you who are here or in the audience who weren't part of that, I would encourage you to go back and look at it, because there's some really good stuff in there that came from the people who know how to do this stuff best with direction to us. And then one is a question. And again, I don't really care how things are lumped and split and how things are grouped, but I noticed that the item 51, which was about adding or removing things from the state plan of flood control or changing purposes of the project, or, decommissioning facilities, I think I would have put that in this bucket here of, and it falls within the operations. And I'm just curious, either way, I don't want to lose sight of that, because I think having a better process for repurposing facilities and, decommissioning things and adding to is important for this section of implementation. And I think for me at least, it lands in the same part of the brain as us having different processes for, for our regulatory changes and such. So again, I don't really care how it's lumped and split, but if there's something about your orientation that you want to report of like the thinking in that, it might help me understand where y'all are coming from on that one.
That was, sorry, I'm off mute. Reef Darling with the Flood Board. It was mainly from needing the plan. So we know that if you're adding an item to a state plan of flood control facility, it needs to be done and the assurances need to be signed and handed over, right? Construction complete. And so removing an item is not as easy in terms of, right, we see that. In my mind, it was more about the strategic planning that needs to happen in order to remove an item from the state plan of flood control. So just like, what are the steps? The flood plan does not lay out the steps for removal. So.
Right, and because of that, and because it's not easy, that's part of the reason we listed it, especially as something that we wanted to focus on. And so I'm more interested in just making sure that we keep an eye on it, but
Yeah, that makes sense
I-
to move it into implementation because it's more, it seems more of a something we want to focus on within the next several, couple years, right? Not 20 years from like a Dos Rios perspective, right? Decommissioning levies.
it seems like something that can help us unlock progress faster on things that we want to do as part of this category.
Okay.
I mean, again, I don't really care that much. I'm more interested in the thought process and how we're going to do it, but I'll flag that anyway for you all to consider.
I'm not so sure it was Dos Rios project, because I don't think there was state plan of flood control levies there, but Three Amigos.
Three Amigos, that's
took
right. Thank you.
So many years, and then we determined it's a change in the operation and maintenance manual, and that's something we can do. So there will be others. There's one up there in Deer Creek that we had some serious enforcement on, and then we found out that they actually have a multi-benefit levy setback project going on. So that might be our next example of quickly doing some kind of revision or removal, changing operation and maintenance instead of putting it back in the position that it always failed.
And from a Three Amigos perspective, the coordination that goes on with the Army Corps through that process has a lot to do with Army Corps federal policies, right? That take years to get through. And so, and from a planning perspective, right, on how you engage and maybe how you advance or what's the word? Bypass certain policies. That's not right, the right word. That's not what the federal government uses, but so, in terms of that, but it makes sense to me that would be an implementation. So we can revise. This is what we want. We want feedback to make sure we're in the right bucket. Or theme category.
Again, it's a good thing this is being recorded and we're all making our notes. So I saw you and staff taking that down. So this is not the be all and end all of it all. Any more, Member Johnson? Not yet. All right, Mr. Wright, or Ms. Darling, who gets the next one? That takes care of, I just have to say, because this is a irk to me. We don't own Title 23. The Code of Regulations has a Title 23 and we're part of it. We're Division 1. And for those of you that want to continue to address the board as you guys, I would ask you to revise your language. Okay, next slide. Which one? Ms. Darling.
Thank you. So our next theme is climate resilience, starting with nature-based solutions. So, incorporating nature-based solutions into where the board is a partner in implementation. We're touching on this currently with the YOLO Bypass Cash Loop Partnership and utilizing planning for nature-based solutions, hopefully within the Corps' federal comp study. So this is something that we've discussed in really early conversations with the Army Corps for that comp study, but it hasn't been scoped yet. So it's just on the table. And we know that our partners at the federal government utilizing nature-based solutions in engineering is something they're really passionate about. So being able to advance these where the board can, and then encouraging our counterparts at DWR and our sister agencies to utilize nature-based solutions as well, where the board has investments or flood risk reduction projects. And then 17, increase levels of flood protection. So that states that studies will continue to develop hydrology based on future climate scenarios, and this information will need to be considered to ensure that levels of flood protection are increased or at least maintained to to meet federal, state, and local requirements, and to provide communities with sufficient and consistent levels of protection. So this is also one of the resolution items that was discussed pretty in depth with our interested parties within the region. I think that this will likely be something that could be recommended to be addressed in coordinating committee. That's 17 specifically. And then assessment of existing standards. So that's 18. The board, in coordination with DWR, will convene Central Valley Flood Protection Interest to explore how future modeled scenarios could be considered in assessing whether the existing standards and guidance, including but not limited to the 1957 profile of the Sacramento River and the 1950 profile drawings for the San Joaquin River, still meet the original intent of flood protection. So I don't want to read all of that. It's in front of you, but that's item 18. This was also one of the items that the Flood Control Association requested that we convene interest and start discussion of that within the coordinating committee. And then moving on to the state system-wide investment approach, that's 20 and 22. So this is also under equity. The board acknowledges that socially vulnerable populations will continue to face disproportionate flood risk and reduced capacity to be resilient to cope, recover, and adapt to flood events. The board will support DWR's efforts to examine how the SSIA will be further refined or further modified to address equity and flood risk reduction benefits. So one of the ways that the board is dealing with that now, as I mentioned earlier, is our flood plan equity work group that will rely on heavy coordination with our counterparts at DWR and potentially also coordinating and advisory committee. And then 22, the board will support DWR's efforts to examine how the SSIA will be further modified to address climate resilience in the flood system. And then lastly, 45, the board will continue to support actions to sustain floodplain agriculture and avoid more intensely developed land uses, which recognize the benefits provided to the state's goals for flood risk reduction, including but not limited to land use compatibility, reduced O&M cost, groundwater recharge, transitory storage, and providing habitat for wildlife. So I think that some of these for the sustaining floodplain agriculture will come out in both coordinating and advisory committee. And through our partnerships with Yolo and Solano County through the Yolo Bypass Cash Slough Partnership. And I'll stop there for conversation.
Thank you. Board members? Oh, Ms. Young, you have more?
Well, I missed San Joaquin Regional Flood Management Strategy. So that's item 25.4 of the governor's water resilience portfolio. So DWR is currently leading that effort. That's under Steve Rothard's group, the Division of Multi-Benefit Initiatives. The Flood Board is a partner on that. And, you know, really working to seek funding to advance the water resilience portfolio and action 25.4. So that's the San Joaquin Regional Flood Management Strategy is specifically 25.4. Thank you.
Thank you. I was going to ask if you put that bullet in another slide, but you did it there. And yes, we need to, I think what has occurred, my observation is what has been experienced with this winter series of atmospheric rivers and the impact and threat to infrastructure, to life, to agriculture, to communities, you name it, and the San Joaquin Valley will accelerate the effort on addressing the issues at this point, and not specifically to address them in the 2027 update, but to look at some implementation factors sooner. Learned a lot. Everyone learned a lot in addressing the impact of that and the massive effort that needed to be done. But the recovery is still upon us all. Actually, the flooding is still something we're all watching because snowpack has not yet disappeared. So, board members, or I'll just keep talking. Okay. All right. Yes, these are very important topics, and obviously they are going to require broad outreach and partnership and many other conversations. So some things will go to coordinating committee, some will go to advisory committee, some will go to both. Joint meetings, and all of our partners of member agencies, they're reaching out to us and we're reaching out to them all the time. And we'll just do that without gaps. Member Bosley, thank you for that. I do look over here once in a
Yeah,
while.
no, it's good. I'm just, one of the things that strikes me is just there are so many different things, and that there's a lot more power in going a layer deeper in understanding kind of what the choices are and where the levers are to push, the regulation changes, the conversations with the federal government about their processes and how we can modernize that. We don't control that in the same way, but we should have a strategy around making sure that communication is open and that we're being clear about what would be more helpful for California. So, I mean, I think that our big challenge is going to be really figuring out work plans for these things, and then getting to the next level of details about the specifics, right? Because that's where the action will happen. So that's just a kind of broad comment.
It seems to me that today the board is laying out the things that we would like to go forward and what's quickly, and maybe some ideas on how. So yes, we would be dependent upon staff to create a work plan for how that accomplishes, so that we're not continually talking about what we need to do or want to do. We have a path forward, knowing what the challenges are. And there are a lot. Johnson?
I'll just say this makes sense to me, and I think several of us had the same thought right at the same time. I just reached over from the microphone, and the two words, the mental notes that I made were work plan, right? Like, which is sometimes one word, sometimes two words, right? But you can imagine how that would work really well on some of these, like reg updates. Some of this very discrete, and something that we have. Others are more, might be sort of process plan with, nested, other things, for all of these, but getting to the point where, we're sort of going through and describing, what are the next steps, who's involved, where are the points of accountability for it, will be, really helpful. And it's good to see how this is laid out as a framework for how we're going to get to that spot.
President Dillon.
Member Grego.
So just to add to some of the conversation, I'm looking at this shared investment need graph that we have in this folder here, and looking at the state contribution versus the federal. And I really believe that the federal portion should be much larger. And I think through advocacy is the way that happens. I remember when I was confirmed to this position, that one of the things that the legislature said was, if there's anything we can do to help, please let us know. And I think that falls true with the feds as well, is to make sure that they understand, in order for us to accomplish this goal, we address regulations and processes on their level. And I believe that pie chart will, on the federal portion, will grow. And so those are things that I think that we should look at as well. Thank you.
We're certainly counting on the federal portion growing this year. There's a cycle between the federal and state as to who has the capability or willingness to do things. All right, any other board members? Audience? No hands up? I'm going to call for a break. Gavel, gavel, 10 minutes. 30-second warning, sit down. That was not a Dolan 10-minute. That was all of you talking 10-minute. But I didn't want it to stop because it looked good. It looked good. All right, the board workshop will reconvene after its morning break. And we are where, Mr. Wright? Slide 8. Funding?
I believe we're on funding.
I think we've talked about it just a bit, but this is more focused.
Thank you. This is Ruth Darling with the Flood Board again. So starting with funding, that's first off is the Sacramento-San Joaquin Drainage District Feasibility Study. It's item 25 of the resolution. So that study is ongoing. It's under my shop, and we are expecting a draft report of findings I believe in July. And we need to socialize that as well with our stakeholders, LMAs, reclamation districts, and then we will bring it to the board also as well at the same time. Make revisions based on stakeholder feedback, and we will have a final report of findings this year. So there are some, if the boards have questions about the feasibility study, please ask me. I do have, some updates just on where we're at in terms of that effort. And then moving on.
It seems to me you told us, and then July is upon us. We'll have a full
Yeah,
report.
it's pretty quick. Yeah.
Yeah, we've been waiting for it. Thank you.
So in July, what are we going to get exactly?
It's a draft report of findings. Yes.
About the feasibility of implementing a property assessment?
It's reutilizing the SSJDD assessment to collect assessments within the district. So right now, the current authority requires a 2/3 majority vote. So the recommendation in the DOF or the report of findings, the ROF, will be to seek legislative change to majority vote, matching Prop 218 requirements. So
To put it more in line with the majority vote for water systems and sanitation.
yeah,
Maybe life safety can be a majority vote.
there are some things that'll be in the ROF that we would want to retain that aren't aligned with 218. So right now, as it sits, the assessment would be voluntary and could not be imposed by the flood board because it requires a 2/3 majority vote unless we were successful at seeking legislative change. So what we're saying is that it should be viewed as a local funding and not an additional state funding source.
We'll look forward to a very detailed discussion on that.
Yes,
Thanks. Are you doing all of these bullets?
I am.
All right, well, Ms. Darling,
We can move on.
go right on. And then we'll ask for a roundtable.
And then we have operation and maintenance. So that's items 23, 28, and then 53D. So 23 talks about necessary funding for operation and maintenance of the flood system, and then additional funding to correct deferred maintenance issues. 28 talks about just statements on the average local state funding needed for O&M activities. And then we have 53D that the board will work with other state and federal agencies to obtain necessary resources and funding for implementation of the plan. We have 29, which is a statement about the need for funding for deferred maintenance activities. And then we have 42, which talks about the need for funding for regional flood management plans. We did hear last month at the coordinating committee, the status on funding for the RFMPs. So that was a good update
And that update is,
from,
and
so
what's the
there,
outcome of the update? That there is,
there is funding for RFMPs right now. Yes. It's approximately $400,000 per RFMP. And most of the contracts have been executed. I think LSDN is the last remaining one. It should be executed this month.
But it's just for 1 year,
Yes.
is my understanding. So we still have like the issue of consistency and that we need to.
Member Bosler says that it still is year by year inconsistency. So yes, thank you for bringing that up. And from me, this gap between the contracts is really difficult to keep momentum and activity. So the board's position is dedicated ongoing funding. Regional flood management planning efforts were essential in developing the first plan, the update, and the second update, and they are essential to achieve cooperation and working together in these regions. So it's so important. I don't understand why it's just not there.
Right, 42 mentions the continuation of dedicated funding.
Yep.
So almost advocating for baseline funding for those RFMPs. So the stopping and the starting is very difficult. We've experienced that on the YOLO Bypass Cash Loop Partnership. So LSDN, Lower Sac Delta North, plays a huge role in that partnership. And, you know, they were offline essentially for months because they had no funding. And so we're excited to get them back this month in June. But yeah, it's the stopping and starting, the inefficiency of that.
Did you cover all these bullets?
And then 49 is
Oh.
resolve unacceptable encroachments throughout the state plan of flood control. So that's a board responsibility to seek additional funding and resources to resolve unacceptable encroachments throughout the SPFC within disadvantaged communities, rural communities, urbanizing communities, and to allow compliance with state mandates. So that's on the flood board to seek funding to accomplish what we said we were going to do for item 49. And then again, item 53 for the overall statement of the board will work with DWR, other state and federal agencies to identify and obtain necessary funding to continue RFMPs and OMRR activities. And
Resolution item 53 has A, B, C, D, E, F, G.
yes,
It's many things there. We're not overlooking all of the various aspects and working together that needs to be done.
And also item 48, which it looks like we missed on our slide, but it is in your board packet, that the board is committed to working with LMAs to correct O&M deficiencies, to obtain, regain, and maintain eligibility with PL 8499. So that's ongoing efforts by the board through board staff.
And we had a great presentation of that, and we do have a request for more resources to continue that, particularly for the rural local maintaining agencies that frankly don't have the staff or capability to do what's necessary. We're helping, our staff is, and so is the board, with letters of intent, moving forward with SWIFTs, and we have encouraged the Army Corps of Engineers to approve letters of intent and SWIFTs more rapidly than their, I don't know if it's an 18-month, 24-month, or what process to do that, but we're encouraging it to speed up.
And that's all for funding, so if there's any discussion or questions on that one?
Member Griego?
Yeah, I just want to kind of take another stab at this, sharing the investment needs. I think that based on what we see here, it's all predicated on whether there is any funding, either on the local, state, or federal side. So it's all a probability of whether there's funding. I think there should be like a little pie slice for that public-private partnership, because that's all predicated on funding as well. So it just gives an example of where we can find other funding at. And so we shouldn't eliminate it by not giving them a slice of the pie. Thank you.
It's my understanding that this brochure that we have today and that was developed for funding is informational and not directive for that, but it does explain that there are funding gaps and that it is shared at all levels, local, state, federal, and we could add any other place who wants to assist. But funding is necessary to implement what is identified as needs to save lives, be resilient for climate change, and to implement what's necessary to do that. No hands? Nobody's waving at me? Then we're ready to go on? Yes, we're ready to go on. Ms. Darling, you're the one.
Operations goes back to,
I was looking at that, would be operations, maybe the
goes back to Michael Wright.
folks underneath the operations can move to the front row instead of the back row. Mr. Wright, I know this is yours.
Yes, this is mine. Thank you, Michael Wright, board staff. Operations, there's really only we had 3 different goals from the resolution that we may cut that down to 2 because we did have modifications, state plan of flood control as goal 51. Board member Johnson asked earlier, should that actually be part of implementation? So we need to revisit that and make sure we have it in the right spot. Other than that,
Operations will be part of it, no matter where it goes for the lead to put the group together.
right? We do have goal 47, which is reduction of hazardous and non-compliant encroachments, as well as increasing our enforcement capacity and looking at a wider use of the board's delegated enforcement authority program. Those all fall under Public Law 8499 eligibility. We did have a pretty in-depth presentation last month by Angeles Caliso, going over her work and the enforcement staff's work, which is our staff that works with the Corps on PL 8499 eligibility. So yeah, this is important. You heard that up to 96% of our levee miles have at one time been deemed inactive in PL 8499 because they didn't quite pass the Corps' inspections. So there's PL 8499 in this, and then in 47, the board also acknowledges that encroachments are a significant component of compliance with PL 8499. And it's a goal to reduce those hazardous and non-compliant encroachments, which is a board responsibility. And then to pursue all avenues available to decrease unacceptable encroachments, including additional resources, increased enforcement capacity, and use of the board's delegated enforcement authority program. We did attempt to use that program. We had a pilot program. We had a few LMAs that signed up to participate in that. And it came back that in most LMAs, they have limited resources to do their normal operation and maintenance practices. And adding another component to what they already do, it just takes resources away from the O&M that they're supposed to be doing. So it didn't fly at that time. Possibly we're looking at somewhat of a program where we could help fund some LMAs that would like to use that program, and that would expand our enforcement capabilities a little bit. So that's one area where we can try to expand. And then, yeah, 51, the board will review and seek refinement of the process by which state plan of flood control is modified through addition, removal, or repurposing of facilities. The thought here, when we're going through these, to get back to Board Member Johnson's question, is we have some levee systems that will never be eligible for PL 8499. There's not enough funding capacity within that basin that's protected by those levees to be eligible. And so we can't get to PL 8499 compliance, and an option may be to remove those from state plan of flood control or modify to where it's a smaller system or a different system, and it can be eligible. But I think that was the thinking behind putting it in operations at the time. That's all I have for the operations topic. If there's any questions. Yes.
Member Countryman?
Just, I'm curious on the modification of state plan of flood control. Does the lower San Joaquin levee district come into play here where, it should be part of the state plan of flood control, but it isn't, or?
I think that should be part of the discussion, yes.
I mean, we have to resolve that somehow.
Yeah.
My understanding is the state still feels that Lower San Joaquin levee districts is part of the state plan of flood control, but the Corps does not.
Right, but I think our definition is based on it being a federal project.
Where we have given assurances to the federal government to operate and maintain. That's part of the definition.
Which is, crazy because we, the state, designed and constructed it. So how could it not be part of the state plan of flood control?
That is indeed the board's position, and it was, even when it was a reclamation board, it is the position of the state of California. Conversations have been underway. There was a little bit of a gap of communication, but what has occurred with the flooding this winter has put it right back on center stage that it needs to be addressed, and that this decision needs to be done, so. This whole idea of adding, removing, modifying is probably going to get a more robust conversation and actions because of what we all saw over the winter in the San Joaquin Valley and continuing with the snow melt. So when there is that kind of discussion of why they don't want to do it, we're going to send you, Member Countryman. When that discussion occurs with the Army Corps as to why they don't think it's part of the state plan of flood control, we're going to send you. Sorry, I said I wasn't making assignments. All right. Wow, that was on funding. I think we covered a lot of it at the opening, but it's sobering to see what needs to be done in this realm. But it is something that we are going to pay attention to rather than throw up our hands. Not furrowed. Talking. I should say at this point, when we came back from break, Vice President Valines needed to leave for a needed visit. Any other comments? Any other comments? All right, we're gonna go on. Maybe we're just hungry. Okay, well. Oh, all right. So we have 1, 2, 3. Let's take one more and then we'll have our lunch break. Strategic planning, unless it's going to take an hour, then we won't.
Okay.
We're back to Ms. Darling.
Yes, thank you. So our next theme is strategic planning. So the first one is item 18, resolution item 18 that we also covered a couple slides back in climate change. So the feedback that we heard from board members is that this would be a great item for a work plan. Identifying, the who and the what. And so, yes, that the outcomes of that work plan or the what of that work plan would definitely need collaboration, likely through the coordinating committee. But I think that's probably the first step. And then we have the Yola Bypass Cash Flow Partnership. So that's item 37. This is ongoing. This is the Flood Planning and Programs branch. That's the 3 staff under me working on the partnership, the Yola Bypass Cash Flow Master Plan, and you will hear from me and partners this month at the June board meeting on the Corps' Yola Bypass Comprehensive Study and the board approving the feasibility cost share agreement. So ongoing efforts. Another great example that we've heard from board members today about the need for partnerships. And moving on to 19. So this is.
Before you leave that, Yola
Go
Bypass
ahead.
Cash Flow, the partnership is large. This is not 3 to 4 groups. This is,
It's 15 agencies. Yes.
yes. You are the one who wrangles it all. So communication occurs and work continues, and what you're doing is a great job. So thanks. I look forward to the presentation.
Yes.
You're-
I think that's another, it is, it's been very challenging just in terms of, like President Dolan mentioned, it is 16. West Safeco is also mentioned, so that makes it 16. And the resources and funding for the partnership, but also what the partnership says that they want to do. So the Yellow Bypass Cash Flow Master Plan, that's a state plan that's state funded, as well as the comprehensive study, but just the overall vision of the partnership, the mission in terms of all boats rise, the 6 pillars that we talk about through flood protection, habitat, ag sustainability, water quality, water supply, recreation, and advancing those pillars. The goal is to advance them along the same path. And so I think partnerships are really helpful, especially, as board member Johnson mentioned earlier, even in the Sutter bypass. But those are, really the locations that seem to be keenly focused for restoration, but also flood control and fish passage. So it's hard to be done, right? Those things are hard to be done in a vacuum. So expanding the net and getting agencies involved, as well as our interested parties. We've done a really great job of the communication and engagement effort, the website, the Gov lists, or, the Gov delivery, just the information sharing and the feedback that's needed to create a successful partnership.
The development of the website specific to that really increases the transparency and the information so that things don't get set aside.
We will also be attending the Floodplain Management Association Conference in Los Angeles in September. So select members from the partnership will be holding an open house style event as opposed to a panel, right? So you can peruse through the room and talk to different subject matter experts that are working on the partnership. So we're preparing for that as well.
Well, that's an interesting way to do it.
Right?
Instead of a 35-minute panel.
We'll have a booth or something.
Yeah, there'll be a couple booths, right? So one for the master plan, one for communication and engagements. We're still planning it out, but it just as opposed to.
It's a good idea.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, moving on to flood emergency response planning. So the board acknowledges a more robust emergency response planning is necessary with its state and local agency partners to address the expected annual life loss and expected annual damages, estimated to increase in future conditions in both the Sacramento and San Joaquin River basins under all climate change scenarios. So I think this is probably one we could discuss a little bit further. This is Board Member Griego really championed this resolution item when we were drafting it. It also occurs again in 53E as flood emergency response planning, so advocating for funding for that topic. And then I'll move on just real quick before discussion and questions in terms of the levee vegetation. Yes, go ahead.
Member Bosler?
Yeah, I mean, this is one that I think, partnerships definitely, because the Office of Emergency Services, like, this is one of their many fundamental roles. And as I've seen in the management of emergencies, like when the Oroville Dam emergency spillway was crumbling, there is a real need for the people who are the technical experts that understand how floodwaters move to really be connected with those emergency managers. And it seems like something that we could really forge some partnerships here at the state level, and then be able to go with forward-facing materials for local governments, even a toolkit or things, because emergency planning happens locally. That's where it needs to happen, but they need support from us. And I think there's some real opportunities to forge strong partnerships with OES on that.
Member Griego?
I agree with Board Member Bosler. Being through 3 of these evacuation, I think that when you live behind a levee that has vulnerability to high water, that evacuation planning is the most number 1 priority. How to move people out. And so sharing some of my experience with you, I'll just take 2017 when Oroville was trying to get out. What happened is the people downstream blocked the roads with their cars and their lines. And Highway 70 could have been a disaster if there would have been a levee failure along those agricultural levees that run parallel with the highway. It could have been really bad. That was low-lying areas. And so having the coordination between the state and the locals is really critical. I can't emphasize it more. But even with that, there's always those things that happen that you never anticipate. You bring in you bring in outside law enforcement because they're not busy in their jurisdiction, they're there to help, but yet they don't know the area at all. And so they're there as a presence, but they're not there for good information sharing for the public. What you see during an evacuation in a critical times are things that you never imagined that you would see. Fist fights at the gas station, people walking, trying to get out because they're fearful of their lives. We even talked about evacuating on your rooftop, and Rodeo the dog was famous for that. So there's a lot of things that happen through those evacuation processes that are not even accounted for. And so we have to look at the past experiences, and this board, some may say that that's not our lane, but I think it is. I think that we should, as board members, when we look at public safety, we should feel some satisfaction or security that these things are being addressed, not just as a state level, but also that the local level is getting that information clearly of how to work through the process of moving thousands of people that are all panicking, because it's not all of a sudden it happens. It happens in a gradual step where, the high water's been on the levee for a month and people are anxious about it. And so they're ready to go, but they don't really know which direction they're going. When they make reference to people who passed away in Yuba County because of levee failures, those folks, most of them either didn't leave or they ran into the water, and that's how they succumbed to the event. So there is a long way we have to go on this, and I think that this board has some obligations of making sure that, there's as much effort put into this planning as anything else. Thank you.
Since one of our main functions that we're proud of is providing forums and information, That would be certainly one way to do it, many ways. And continual discussion and updates of the plans as well. Vicki?
I think this is likely another item that we could develop a work plan for. I have discussed this theme with our counterparts at DFM that are now leading the flood plan update for 2027, and it's resonating with them as well. But I think, yes, I like the partnership idea in terms of maybe Caltrans, Cal OES, but as President Dolan said, the public forum piece. I also, around the time of that Oroville happened, I think that DWR had a more robust outreach, or maybe I'm misspeaking, and I just haven't seen it recently. But there were quite a bit of items that they would hand out, like go to schools, and they were coloring books and how to do your go bag, and it was more of a public outreach for emergency planning. And maybe that is another thing that, everything needs funding, right? But I think that was a huge success. It definitely, I think, helped in terms of local planning efforts. And I know my kids talked about it in their school, right? Because DWR took them to local schools. So maybe it's almost like we've been speaking recently too about the board's visibility, but maybe it's also one of those pieces in terms of how we educate and outreach materials. And, our previous board president, Bill Edgar, used to attend the high water event down at Discovery Park. That was annual. And so different pieces where we can plug in like that and then increase the awareness and the discussion around emergency preparedness and response. So just another thought that we could probably put into the work plan. I think it's one of the higher priorities that we've been hearing a lot of.
Don't see any nods, don't see any nods. Oop.
Yeah, I just want to add on, I know
Member Bosler.
I know because of my role in prior years, because we've had to do so many evacuations in the last several years because of forest fires mainly. There has been a concerted effort and there has already been investments. And that's why I really think these conversations can start right away, because OES is really leading the charge on a very much more robust planning effort with local governments about updating emergency plans. And the flood should just, slot right into those efforts. A lot of counties are now investing in really high-tech technology to be able to communicate directly with all of their citizens, or all of the individuals in their communities, which is, that seems so basic, but it's the hardest part, is getting people to know what's going on and what they're supposed to do. And then, of course, there's huge equity issues, especially around individuals with disabilities, elderly individuals. Those communities are better served in an emergency if we know where those populations are and that support can go there first. Because a lot of people will be able to move easily, but some people will need help. And minutes and hours are critical during an emergency. So there's a huge effort underway right now. We should plug into that. We should make sure we're coordinated.
President Dolan.
Hopefully someone's got a star on that one too. Figured, okay, good.
I just,
Member Grego, was
Thank you.
somebody beeping? I was, sorry.
Board Member Grego. I just want to, you reminded me something, Board Member Bosler. It was while I was sitting on SACOG that I had made a proposal for some grant money. Unfortunately, it didn't get funded. But what it was is that, because of technology, as you mentioned, and even with our cars, the technology that we have today, is that my proposal was to put sensors in the roads where it's vulnerable at, whether it's fires or waters. These sensors would detect whether there's water coming across the road or there would be smoke coming across the road. And it would talk to either our phone or our cars to say, take a different route. I really think that, and I don't like to talk bad about SACOG because I love that organization, but I think they really missed an opportunity there to look at these kind of technologies and how it works with emergency planning. And so maybe one day somebody will figure that out and decide to invest in that kind of technology, because I think for California especially, we're either running for floods or we're running from fires. Thank you.
Well, Member Grego, I'm glad you said how much you appreciate SACOG, because we're in their fine facility. And we like to be here.
I used to sit there.
But it's very important. Since we're all adding our local experience, I will try to be brief. I live in Butte County. I live in Chico. Chico is a community where people evacuate to, not from. So we experienced not a well-planned evacuation at the Oroville Spillway, as most people will attest to that. It was get out now on a Sunday afternoon. And all of the law enforcement entities from the local right up to OES came together as quickly as they could for that to do. And fortunately, the disaster that could have happened did not, but the evacuation was fascinating. And really, really challenging. And just one little story. The Chico area sent people over who had larger vehicles to two homebound homes in the city of Oroville to bring them to Chico. And then 3 of the homes, residents, wouldn't go back until the people who brought them to Chico went back and told them it was going to be okay. So during that time, we made friends. And then when we don't have floods up in our area, we burn up. So we have really experienced evacuations in Northern California with that. And investments have been made because PG&E provided money. So there are sirens, and they're not just in the foothills, but other places. There's not sensors in the roads there, but there are now freeway and important highway route signs when things occur. To do that, but you're always going to reach somebody that doesn't have that cell phone. And a lot of that use of cell phone alerts there. We were all sitting some meeting somewhere when the earthquake happened in Chester. We were probably 250 miles away, and we all got a beep that there was an earthquake and dive under the table. And we do get all those. So there is that technology that's occurring. It seems to be more toward the cell phone than the streetscape. But there you are. That wasn't brief. Don't call on me anymore. So for this strategic planning, I know that I saw staff making a lot of notes because we want some kind of outline on how this can be, the what and the who and the how and the partners and all of that. But strategic planning to do this is how we continue to address the issues and moving forward. So it's great. Anyone on board? Any more comments? Audience? No hands up. We're going to take a 35-minute lunch break. Gavel, gavel. Thank you. The Central Valley Flood Protection Board workshop is reconvening. That was just a bit longer than a 35-minute break, but that's the way it goes. So we're going to reconvene. We are pretty much toward the end and wrap-up kind of discussion and decisions, I think. Mr. Wright is shaking his head, yes. It's my understanding we're on slide 11, called workshop schedule, forums, discussion. So, Mr. Wright, you can explain this and then you'll receive just a little bit of feedback from the board that maybe we don't want one board workshop after another.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for how you organize this and allow us to have a conversation, one of many that we will have.
You're welcome. looking at the remaining workshops of this year and then moving into next year as well, we tried to hit all of the themes at a workshop, and didn't really dive too far into which goal from, which theme could go someplace else. We kind of talked about it a little bit, talked about coordinating committee, advisory committee, but we haven't dissected the themes very much at this point, other than today's discussion. So if we just look at the remaining workshops for this year, this is the schedule. Operations, I mean, it's all up for discussion, of course, but operations was placed in July as the next workshop because I thought it was prime after last month's discussion on enforcement and the work the enforcement staff does. And President Dolan, you actually mentioned that it would be a better 4-hour workshop than a hour presentation. So that was the thought on having operations first, not necessarily because it's more important or less important than any of the other themes, but I think it's the one that we can get to the quickest.
Well, since you quoted me, I'll have to agree. And I think it's right. I think the focus would, because operations has been giving really excellent comprehensive presentations at board meetings. And I'm glad I thought of that. I know you all think you did, but I did. So I think on this one, the focus of this one would be, what are the bumps in our operation process? What are the bumps in permitting? And what might be a strategy to improve those? Knowing, of course, that funding and resources is on the list, but there might be other things that we could do. I think if you did that, then we could have a good discussion at the board. But I would hope that all of staff could be here or wherever we are.
Yeah.
Rather than zooming in. Well, those of you that are here are saying yes, but and, we bring lunch, we bring sandwiches. Member Bosler?
I'm just trying to kind of envision how this will go because I think it's hard to, I feel like we've had very open-ended and good conversation today, but it's probably more productive to have us reacting to something. Like, here are the things that staff has brainstormed as courses of action to take. Let's, what's the board's feedback, the public's feedback, like there's value in being able to react to something. I'm just looking at what is in operation. So, enforcement capacity, the board's delegated enforcement authority, like those are interesting topics to me. Like for me, I've been sitting here going, how is it that we triage? Like, how do we look at all of our responsibility area and try and identify the highest risk encroachments that have the most risk of impacting flood, as opposed to just kind of systematically working from one side to the other. Because we know that, I guess I would like more conversation than just triple our staff. That's, we can talk about that, but it's not really something that we're going to resolve here. But I also think it makes a stronger BCP proposal to show how we're optimizing what we have today.
I think those are good points. I see some nods, something there. We do know that resources are not adequate. We're there. We're paying attention to it. We're not saying, forget it, we can't do it. But there are things that staff has been thinking maybe to incrementally enact. My view is, rather than saying we don't have resources, therefore we can't do it, is a non-starter. If we can begin to do some things and then demonstrate how important what we have been able to do is, and it would be even more important with resources, we are putting that idea out there and we are increasing our potential of receiving what we need. Probably not this budget year, if you've been following it, but begin to do that so they have a conversation. Because you're all really super smart. Tell us what your ideas are to do it. I know, she comes after Member Bosler all the
Sorry,
time.
sorry. I have one more
I'm sorry.
question. I have one more question.
But I don't think she's finished.
Well, I
Member
just have a
Bosler.
question about the modification, because I'm new, and so I
was
don't
gonna
know.
put that.
Modification of state plan of flood control, and I'm reading 51, like, who's got the list? I mean, I'm assuming these are things that we've been talking about for years, you know, I would just love to, like, what features are they? Obviously, the Tulare Basin is one of them, and there was a very lovely article in the Bee about that specific topic. But what are we talking about in 51 here?
Well, then that would be what we would
Review
ask
and
staff
seek
to be, bring
refinement.
some specificity
Addition,
to us.
removal, and repurposing. I'm interested, but I don't have any idea what that is
I know
at
it's
this point.
repurposing, it's removal. What did we learn with Three Amigos about changing the operation and maintenance manual kind of thing? I mean, they repurposed that system and then they thought they had to go to Congress to change things. So bring some specificity to that. My memory of the times we've talked about it is it's something we should address. I don't ever remember a list or specific examples other than Three Amigos, who just plain wanted out of the system, but the end result was a changed operations manual.
I think there's value in evaluating whether there is value to the state plan versus, and if there isn't, there should be a process for relinquishing responsibility to the locals.
adding.
We do that on the highway system all the time.
Yes.
I mean, there are things that are deemed highways that are literally local roads. And so we do, but they were highways at one point,
I agree.
and they may have been valuable at one point, but they may not be anymore for lots of different reasons. So we should look at that.
Yes. Okay. You understand operations folks, what you might be bringing for that workshop? It might not be the be all and end all, but it will be a start of talking
It
about.
seems like a lot, like all
It's a
of
lot.
it. So I
It's
feel
a
like,
lot.
I'd rather see a few topics like with more depth than all of the topics. But I don't know how the rest of the board feels.
Well, I don't think we want a whole day workshop. But I have to go to Member Grego next, and then we'll come around. Member Grego.
Thank you, Mary Jane Grego. I heard, did I mention I'm impatient? Did I mention that to anybody? Did you hear it? Okay, good. Because when I saw this schedule, I was sad about this because I thought, oh man, this is a whole year. And I think today through the discussion, I heard something to the effect of combining some of these things or delegating it to other committees. I think that's smart. I think that's the way to work efficiently. I think that we should work at a pace as if our home sat next to an agricultural levee. That's the pace I think we should work at. So one thing I would like to, maybe recommend too is that we have, and I think that this is board members' work, is advocacy. I know that we have a ledge person, but I think that when I have done advocacy work for either any of the agencies I've sat on, whether working through the state or through the federal government, is that they like to hear from folks that are accountable to the public. So, it's not as effective when you have a consultant making the arguments, or even just, and I don't mean this badly, but even staff. But when you have somebody that represents a constituency, whether you're appointed or you're elected, it weighs a little heavier with the legislatures, whether they be state or federal. And that's my experience. And so when we look at regulations and processes, those things should be in a letter form, and they should be advocated by those that are accountable. So just some food for thought on that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I would add that that's not a workshop. That's a direction to staff to develop a draft plan so that we can enact it. And I will tell you that your executive committee is working on that with our new executive officer. So more visibility for our needs. Anything else on potential workshop focused on the operations issues and needs? You're not going, are you going for it, Member Johnson?
No, go ahead. I'm just checking something out.
Okay. Mr. Wright, do you have enough direction on how to prepare for July 14th?
I believe so. I would like to follow up real quick on Board Member Bosler's comment on 51. And that 51 is really, I think, talking about the process by which it's modified. And you were asking about, where's the list? Where's this?
Like the features, yeah. Some part of
There is water code that requires the plan to be developed and updated every 5 years. And within that code, it talks about the plan shall contain a section identifying portions of the system that should be removed or modified or added. I think it's not the exact language, but
Okay.
it's supposed to be in the plan. I don't believe it has been. I think there's been a couple examples in past iterations of the plan.
Okay.
But I think that would be useful to have that in the plan, if that could be studied or looked at to where there is a list of areas that maybe shouldn't be part of state plan of flood control or areas that should be.
That sounds like a good discussion under a workshop called operations. One of the things. I'll help you with that.
Okay.
Member Johnson,
This is back to the,
is your microphone on?
It is.
Okay.
back to the encroachments and enforcement capacity, and agreeing that it's not just about needing more resources, but also believing that part of it is, we do need more resources, right? And the thing that would help me there is, in order to be our advocate for those resources, would be helping me refine the case for what happens if we don't have more capacity, and if we're not increasing the pace of improving compliance, removing non-compliant encroachments. What are the real risks of that? I mean, I know in general, obvious categories are things fail, property gets flooded, people are at risk of lives, but how and when and how much risk, and risk of, losing or not being able to gain PL 8499 funding. I think our ability to get those resources will be directly connected to our ability to say what the state and what taxpayers gain or lose if we don't, and sort of in what increments, so that it's doesn't feel all or nothing and hopeless, but these are the value of, if we had this much more, here's what the difference would make in terms of other money coming back to California from the federal government, or risk to property and lives, and really helping us disaggregate that enough to be able to make the best case that we can. And I think that flows naturally from just describing what the backlog is and the numbers. But for me, at least, it's really easy to get lost in the numbers of non-compliant encroachments, and knowing that there's a whole bunch of different types of encroachments, and which are the ones that actually create different types of risk, and which maybe are low risk to property, but could impact PL 8499 or something. And being able to tease that out, I think would be really helpful.
I'm glad this is being recorded. Excellent points. You ready to move to the next box? Mr. Wright.
Okay, next workshop, August 11th, we have implementation in that box. Not that it has to be there. There isn't any reason that we chose implementation. It just seemed to flow.
It flows to me. What flows to me is to have a conversation, and might be a pretty short workshop. Who are the partners that we need to bring into this? What are the barriers to this? Is there any ways without 4 years of updating a certain section of Title 23, Division 1, Section 6, that we can move forward with projects? would be that. And I also put on this one, is this a coordinating committee conversation? I think we'd want to add that into that too, because it's just, well, for one, we get more people who want to talk. And we've had board months where the coordinating committee and the board had the same agenda, and it really meshed well. We brought that forward from the coordinating committee's conversation to the board actually giving some further conversation and direction. But that's my idea. As you know, the board can decide. My ladies are saying nothing, my gentlemen are saying nothing, so
This one,
There's-
yeah.
well, I was waiting for you, Member Bosler.
Well, this one to me has like the danger of being really like, it's really big, right? Like, I mean, every single one of those items I think could be, but I do think it helps to have the conversation. For example, I'd love to get into the muck on how are we modernizing board standards. I understand that there's a whole lot of work that needs to go into that. But I mean, that to me is a huge, huge topic by itself, and that's just one of the 8 items in implementation, right? So I feel like how are we going to triage that to make it a more in-depth and meaningful conversation where there's real things to react to and conversation about how we're moving the package to OAL in the next year or something.
Specificity, not theories, not wants.
Yeah.
And we will talk about standards upgrade, and I need to say that because Board Member Ramirez is not here, and I know he would say that. That was his, he said, we got to move our standards into the 21st century. My view is maybe the latter part of the 20th, we could perhaps get there, even though we're well into the 21st century. But yeah, good point. Got that down, Mr. Wright? Nope, nope.
If I may, Ruth, with the flood.
Of course,
Thank
Ms.
you.
Darling.
Just we've heard today, and then just discussions offline a little bit with Board Member Johnson. Just that modernizing board standards, since that's a board responsibility, that would be a great topic for a work plan, right? So I think that if we could do that, and then taking the work plan to the workshop, so then staff has all of that laid out in front of you. Who's responsible for it, timeline, what it is, and then maybe just drilling down a little bit further. So I think the only piece to that is the time it takes to create the work plan. So I've just jotted down several of the resolution items that would likely need a work plan based upon that they're our responsibility. And then the ones that are of highest priority, we've heard Board Member Ramirez state that this is a high priority for him. Start those work plans first and then filter them into workshops or coordinating committees. But I think that sort of really gets to what you're, okay, thank you.
Perhaps not actually bringing the work plan, except maybe a shell of it, but which ones that you are working on developing one for that? And please know that Board Member Ramirez says that often, that modernizing our standards is very important, but no one on the board is objecting to his statement. So it is board priority. We know it's difficult. All right. Next, I guess we're skipping to October because, but by the way, family. Floodplain Management Association Conference is always starting the Tuesday after Labor Day, September. So I believe we have our executive officer, we have Member Grego, Member Countryman going. Is there a number of staff going as well? Are you here? Raise your hand if you are. Okay. Are any of you on a panel? you're on a whole booth the whole time, correct, Ms. Darling? Are you on a panel? You're part of the booth. Yola Bypass, your crew is doing that. Mr. Harvey, we were not invited to do a panel on expanding the floodway to save lives and property and infrastructure and improving groundwater. Are you on it? Okay, I didn't see your hand go up. Well, that was very, very minor to do that. I preach this a lot, but widening the floodplain is our responsibility, our duty, our authority, our obligation. We can do that. And in doing that, in what we've learned, if we direct where floodwaters go, we can save lives, we can save infrastructure, we improve the environment, and we recharge groundwater. And we get everybody to work together. We have to take the leadership that we can break down silos of working together. That's what we should do. I won't be there, but you can say that. Thank you. Okay. Oh, well, we're moving into climate resilience, so I already said it. Mr. Wright, your
Okay,
next
thank you.
idea.
So correct, no workshop in September because of FMA. Climate resilience, we have 2 workshops on this schedule currently. One in the San Joaquin, Stockton area. Just, climate change is affecting everything, and it's very visual right now in the San Joaquin Basin, in the Tulare Basin, with the historic snowpack and snow melt. So thought it would be appropriate to have, a couple workshops on climate change, one San Joaquin Basin and one Sacramento Basin.
Are you thinking of a site visit or just presence in one of the locations? You don't know
I
yet.
haven't really thought that out. I mean, once you throw a site visit into a 4-hour workshop, your time to sit around and discuss topics is diminished.
Yeah. All right. But we'll look toward something in the San Joaquin Valley area for a workshop with the theme of climate resilience, which is the #1 theme of the plan, which it'll still be formulated. Does that sound okay to the board? Go to Stockton. We have to get up pretty early. Member Bosley.
Seems like this could be one of these 2. I know that there's been significant investments in climate science at both Natural Resources Agency and DWR. And this could be a really nice place where some of the fruits of those investments could be presented in a nice public forum. And I know that Joe and I have talked about this a lot, because this is really, really important to how we plan, but also how we manage in these high water events. So I just think that there's probably some natural synergies here with like DWR, at least at the very top, I know has told me that they want some opportunities to be able to discuss in a public
yeah.
setting.
Right, presentation, lessons learned, what do we know, what
Specifically
the
about the
research told us,
science, the science
how does it
research
work,
that they're.
and the science, yes. And I think that they will explain how it helped to make decisions for what did occur and is occurring. Okay, that as well. Take away the site visit. Do that instead.
I didn't hear you.
We don't have to do a site visit then. Listen to the recording of Member Bosler.
Got it.
Okay. Yes, you are. All right, I don't see anyone else. Next one. November is a no workshop month because of the calendar.
Yeah, we typically don't schedule a workshop in November because of the holidays. It just doesn't quite fit.
Well, our business board meeting moves earlier in the
Right.
month, so it would be, yeah, so that's not, okay. Annual end of the year workshop usually is staff presenting accomplishments for the year.
Right, we've been doing that for a few years now. It's each branch presents their accomplishments for the year and their goals for the next year. Just because we've been doing it every year doesn't mean we have to. So this, I mean, could be where we could put in another one of the topics we've been discussing today, if the board members chose.
Hearing from staff's accomplishments and works and goals, you've been doing this for almost all the years I've been on the board. I find extremely informative and helpful, and allows us to understand where our advocacy really needs to bump up. Plus, then we go celebrate. All right, I got one agreement. Anyone disagree? What, are you being shy? You don't want to talk to us? I know I'm having you come branch by branch to give your presentations, but that end of year shine, this is what we accomplished and what we hope to. It's something I don't want to miss. I'll make you come the Thursday, oh no, Thanksgiving is a Thursday. Keep it.
Okay, we'll keep it. And then we're into January of 2024 with Climate Resilience Part 2.
It just, 2024. Okay. I know. Yes, and it's June, and, you know, in many ways, my brain is still on March, but, yeah, it's June. Okay. So that gives you a little time to, we'll have had one, and then the next, this is a very important topic, and it's central to almost everything that we do in permitting and revising and planning and hoping. So you'll have some time between the one in October to give more format to one in January.
I brought beer.
That's my job. That's my job. I'm the one who went to Chico State.
For the friends who have, that was a Coca-Cola.
That wasn't a cue to be called upon, I take it then. All right, we'll move forward. Okay. Maybe you can go through the early part of 2024 pretty rapidly. Funding. Is this the point we can have some conversation about what our BCPs are, aren't, can be, what was accomplished, what our strategy is to?
Yeah, Chris Leaf, Executive Officer. So by that time in February, we'll be after the governor's budget release, so we'll know what we have in the governor's budget and can discuss that. There are a number of proposals that we're working on to hopefully get into the governor's budget, but we'll know for sure by then.
Okay. Because we do have some restrictions of how much is to be made public in advance of other actions. And we don't want to step on that. So February, we'll try to have that conversation. You know, some of the organizations I belong to, we just keep having bake sales. I can do that. Well, then maybe we want to have that workshop at the diner. Yeah, there you go. Okay.
Okay, so funding in February, planning in March, and then we did hear from the board members that it would be nice to be able to travel and meet with some of the RFMPs or all of them, and we could bundle those 2 RFMPs per trip possibly. But by the time we get through with those, we're a year from now.
Wow. Yeah, I think that would be good to go and to see. I mean, we hear and we champion, and some of us live in areas where we communicate with them. We all have a liaison to participate in meetings and events of that, but to see that as a board and our companions that come with us would be very helpful. And it was absolutely demonstrate how important they are. On every level, cooperation, regional view, landscape view, improving the system, saving lives, saving communities, addressing deficiencies. evacuation planning together, so you don't just do it to your border, you do it where people can go. Yeah, very important. And the successes, definitely. Challenges, yes, we'll go where the success is, but then we want to go see where we need to help you more. I'm looking at Megan Nagy, and she's like, I got it, Jane. Mr. Slater, you can have your whole flood control association be online. Okay, put his thumb up. Okay, so 3 trips.
Is there any desire among the board to move one or more of those trips sooner, move it up in the schedule? Or, I mean, we move things up, other things move down, right, obviously, but there's limited time to get through all these important topics.
Right. I can't think of one, but if something comes up where you're just not ready for what we call as a subject matter, and you have that in time to say, okay, we're going to go to X.
Okay.
I would think we could give you that flexibility to rearrange. This is not a static that we're talking about at this point. Is that correct, board? They can rearrange, possible, just don't avoid these big topics.
Understood.
Member Johnson?
On the question of, sequencing and travel and such, I think we've all said, how much we prioritize getting to implementation of the plan. So I think it's good to have the workshops be focused around how we're implementing the plan. But I also do like site visits, and I would just note that, we have the ability to do that not just on the traditional workshop days, and particularly if it's somebody that other than us organizing something that we can be to, I would encourage us to think about when we can do site visits, even if they're not on one of those workshop days, and keep the schedule, but not also miss opportunities to see things that we ought to see.
Anybody not agree? That might be easier. Yeah, thank you. Well said. Okay. Are we at the end of your PowerPoint, Mr. Wright?
I believe that is the second to last slide, and that's the end.
Okay. Oh, you put one that is identical to the number 1.
Mhm.
Is that right? Okay. Why not? Okay. Any concluding remarks, Mr. Wright?
No, I believe we've covered everything that we intended to cover. We received very good feedback and have good direction on moving forward with future workshops. So I think I'm good.
Okay. You are. We look forward to work plans and spreadsheets and assignments and such. Any concluding remarks, Ms. Darling? No. Ms. Buckley, you've talked so much. I just wanted to give you the opportunity in case you wanted to keep speaking. Okay. Oh, yeah. Go. Wait. No, I'm not going to ask those two. They've had enough. You can go after Member Johnson. Member Johnson.
Well, I have
Now
one
I know
that's,
why people think I'm funny.
I have one that's a little bit off topic for the workshop, itself, but it's related to the schedule for meetings and workshops, which is a few months ago, as we were sort of first into the heavy period of flooding around the state, at one of our meetings, a number of us were talking about having a time later this year to come back and assess lessons learned and what our experiences were, once the water starts to come down. We've got parts of the state where that hasn't happened yet. So it'd be later in the year, but I don't want to lose sight of that, because I think even at that meeting, we had a bunch of notes of things coming in from the audience and participants of really good ideas to share out to others. And I think if we structure, I still like the idea of structuring something for reporting back on what we saw and how it compared to what we might have expected and what lessons were learned. That's a good idea. That could also be at a board meeting and not a workshop, even though it seems like it could be a workshop sort of topic. If it were to be a workshop, maybe we could squeeze it in November. But I at least wouldn't want to lose sight of that concept entirely, because it seemed like a really good one to me.
I do remember that. And we had many local agencies and even had someone here from DWR that explained what was going on and the responses that they were doing. And the staff who activated gave us real experiences of what they did. So maybe bringing them back to talk about what we learned. Excellent. Countrymen, you happy with the schedule? Thank you for going to FMA. Member Bosler. Member Grego.
Thank you, Mary Jane Grego. Seems like we're at the end of our agenda here, and so I just wanted to share some pictures. Would this be a good time?
Oh, yes. Oh, boy. She showed, we carpool. She showed me pictures on her phone, and I think that Chavez Agustin figured out how to put it up. Tell us what we're going to see.
So the Yuba Water Agency provided a tour where Board Member Bosler and Andrea and
Got the photos?
Chris and David and Zubair attended this tour, and just a small peek of where we were at. Here we're on the Yuba River, and this is some of the public-private partnership between Tygart and the agency working on degrading what is considered a middle training wall. And what that does is it not only helps the fishery, but it also builds capacity within the channel in the river. I could go into a long story, but I'm not going to because we only have limited time. But there you can see us with the background being the Yuba River flowing in areas that traditionally it was not there before, at a fast rate of pace there. Here's Bullard's Bar Dam, and you can see it's very full. Lots of water there, but making releases so as to, work with the other reservoirs in the state above us and not trying to impact downstream communities as well. So being responsible. Here we are, getting ready to have a bite to eat at one of the local cafes in the foothills. Very nice menu, good eats there.
What a great group. Why wasn't I there? Oh, I would have been the third. That's not allowed. Okay.
Here we are on one of the mounds of gravel tailings. It's very scary up there, to be quite honest with you. I thought I was going to bite it a couple of times, but this is Chris, who's working on this project here, and I think at that point I'm giving some historical perspective on this project.
Those are the gravel mounds left from the Tygart operate. I remember when we did a little hike there too, and it was
Yep.
like, oh,
The gold rush.
Yeah, from Nevada County with the hydraulic mining, it landed all in Yuba County.
it
And
sure
so-
did.
There it is.
Well, there's the start of the Sawyer decision.
That's exactly right. Yes.
Keely, you look ready to go to the apex.
Here we are on the catwalk above the spillway, and the spillway is going,
Right under it.
yeah, right under us. You could feel the energy of that water right underneath us. And so I'm holding on to that bar as well as the Bossler. And I didn't even care about the poop that was on that bird poop that was on there. I was holding on, but you can see us all smiling and acting brave. It was quite a sight. Here we are at the base of the Bullard's Bar. It's a double concave dam. It's concave.
Mechanical.
Yeah, it's concave this way, and it's concave from top to bottom as well. That's why they call it double. Oh, that's the last picture when we get ready to go, but there's one more in the dam. There we are. That is when they get into the bedrock of the dam. And that was fun. Yeah. It's like, goodbye.
Wow, thank you. I didn't want to be the only one to see these photos. What a great day. And it reminds me of when we had coordinating committee out on the Delta, whatever it was, in the river, and we saw Patricia Yuba, the whole story of creating this dam and Yuba getting together and the work together. Amazing. It's like a pretty day, too.
Jane, I have more to say, sorry.
You have
Just a few things, just a couple things that I don't
Member
want to.
Bosler, do you have a film to show
No,
us?
no film. But I really wanted to go up there because I had heard so much about the collaborative projects that they have been doing. And it was really, really impressive, including something we didn't get to see, but they're doing a major investment in the upper watershed. And he's got Willie, what's Willie's last name? Willitsey. He's got 20 partners on this upper watershed project that is a flood. It's a really important project for their watershed, and especially so timely after the Feather River Canyon had just burned, to think about that Yuba River as well, and just doing a lot of really interesting projects with lots and lots of partners, and just doing a great job. So a couple things I asked was just about, and he's feeling really positive about the ability to get projects done. They had just stood with the governor about the big fishery project just recently that he worked really hard with the Department of Fish and Wildlife on. DeGear, yes, I couldn't remember the name of the project, right by the DeGear Dam. But I asked him, some hard questions about, what would you do differently, and what do you see as, and he really was really complimentary right now about the orientation of our board, of other department and agencies in the state that are really looking for solutions and looking for collaborations. And so I want to build on that. I hope we can all build on that momentum in other parts of our system to get these projects done, and to be proactive in accelerating the pace and scale of the implementation of the flood plan. But super impressive organization up there, and just a great day to understand more about how they do it. And even within their county, there's just a lot of collaboration across different disciplines and agencies working together on projects to benefit the communities and reduce flood risk.
Thank you. That's nice.
It's a county that has an amazing history of collaboration that came from, let's stop having disasters, let's work together. So, it's a lesson for us all. What? Oh, that's right. We have an agenda item here, which is public comment, non-agenda items. And I understand our board council has a non-agenda item, public comment.
I do not personally, but thank you, President Dolan, GDOA Board Council. Just wanted to note for the record that we did receive an email from Mr. Mark Portuendo with a public comment, and that will be entered in the record. In essence, it's thanking, board staff for their work on the authorization of the temporary fences in the pocket area, and included some pictures along with his email showing some homeless encampments and fires, looks like at the toe of the levee and things that they had complained about in terms of trespass on their private property. So that has been forwarded to Chavez and will be part of the record of this workshop.
And it will be forwarded to each of us so that we could see the pictures
Yes.
that he sent. Well, that was good of him to do that, and good of staff to move on that quickly. I knew you were all doing it with the temporary fences. It's just, if he wants to take credit, that would be fine. If the staff wanted to take credit, that would be fine, because you were working on it. Okay. I'm sorry for that confusion. Chavez said, our board council has a public comment. So I didn't get the whole sense. Oh, he does? Okay. made you talk. Anything, any other public comments? Anyone want to make a comment that wasn't on our agenda? Just want to talk to us? I don't see anything. I don't see any hands raised. Board members, anything else? Are you sure?
I don't know if she's gonna let us sit together anymore.
You've been too talkative, Mr. Countryman. I'm not calling on you. All right, well, Member Johnson, you're assigned to fill Member Ramirez in on everything we talked about. Okay, and it's being recorded, and the meeting is adjourned. Gavel, gavel. Thank you, SACOG, for your help.